The document was 1 page long. 1 page. A standard transfer form from the county recorder's office in Harris County, Texas. Black ink on white paper. The kind of form that is so ordinary, so bureaucratic, so completely unremarkable that you could pass it 100 times in a hallway and never think twice. My name was on it. My full legal name, Rachel Ann Whitfield, printed in the section labeled grantor, and below it, in the signature line that was supposed to carry the weight of my consent, my future, my share of everything my father had built over 41 years of working double shifts at a chemical plant in Baytown. There was a signature. It was not mine. I need you to sit with that for a moment, because I know how it sounds. I know it sounds like something from a movie, like something dramatic and obvious that you would see coming a mile away. But I did not see it coming. Not even close. Because the person who signed my name, the person who pressed pen to paper and wrote something that looked just enough like my signature to pass through 2 different county offices, was my sister, Danielle. And Danielle had been standing in my kitchen 3 days before, helping me make chicken tortilla soup, asking me if I thought Dad was doing okay with the new medication. That is the part that still catches in my chest when I think about it. Not the legal violation, not the money, not even what it meant for our father's estate. It is the soup. It is the fact that she stood there, stirring a pot in my house, looking at me with that concerned sister expression, and already knew what she had done. Already knew. To understand what that document meant, you have to understand what the house meant. My father, Robert Gerald Whitfield, bought that property in 1987, a 3-bedroom ranch on Sycamore Ridge Drive in Pasadena, Texas. It was not a beautiful house. The carpet in the living room was a shade of brown that had not been fashionable since 1974. The backyard flooded every time it rained hard, which in southeast Texas is constantly. The garage door opener broke in 2003, and my father never replaced it because he said you could just as easily open it by hand, and that technology was making people lazy. But it was his. He paid every mortgage payment, every tax bill, every plumber's invoice for that stubborn copper pipe under the master bath. He mowed that lawn every Saturday from March through October for 3 decades. He painted the shutters by himself at 71 years old, standing on a ladder that made my stomach drop just looking at it. And when his health started to slip, when the cop got serious enough that he could not make it through a full sentence without stopping to breathe, he called me. Not Danielle. Me. He asked me to come over on a Tuesday afternoon in January, and he sat me down at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder, and he told me what he wanted to happen. He wanted the house to be split evenly. Equal thirds, actually, because there was also my brother Marcus who lived out in Phoenix, and who my father had not seen in 2 years, but still loved in that quiet, patient way that fathers love sons who have disappointed them. Equal thirds. He was very clear about that. He had written it on a yellow legal pad in his careful block letters, the way he used to label everything in the garage. Neat. Deliberate. Certain. He was not certain about much at that point. His hands shook when he poured the coffee. He had to ask me twice what day of the week it was. But on this, on who got what, on fairness, on not letting this house become a weapon after he was gone, on this he was absolutely clear. I squeezed his hand, and I told him not to worry. I told him I would handle it. I meant it. I genuinely meant every word of it. I spent the next 6 weeks working with an estate attorney named Sandra Park, out of her office on Westheimer Road in Houston. We drafted the will language, we talked through the transfer on death deed process, we made sure everything was structured so that when the time came, the transition would be clean. No probate nightmare. No family court. No bitter negotiation at the worst possible moment. I paid Sandra's retainer out of my own pocket. $1,400. I drove 40 minutes each way to her office 3 separate times. I filed the preliminary paperwork with the county recorder in late February. All of it. Properly. With real signatures, mine and my father's, notarized by a woman named Gloria at the Up store on Spencer Highway, who had a bowl of candy on her desk and complimented my father's handwriting. Everything was in order. Everything was already done. Except for one thing I did not know yet. Danielle had filed something first. Look, I want to be honest with you here, because the honest version of this story is more interesting than the clean version. I was not a perfect daughter. I was not even a particularly attentive sister in that last year of my father's life. I had a full-time job as a project coordinator for a construction management firm in the Galleria area. I had 2 kids, Lily, who was 9, and Connor, who was 6. I had a marriage that was, let's call it, load-bearing, the way an old house is load-bearing. Technically holding, but you do not want to push on any of the walls too hard. I was stretched. I was always stretched. And there was a part of me that was grateful, genuinely, shamefully grateful, that Danielle was the one who lived 20 minutes from Dad. That Danielle was the one who was picking up his prescriptions and taking him to his pulmonology appointments and sitting with him through the long, slow Tuesday afternoons. I told myself that was an equal division of labor. I was handling the legal and financial side. She was handling the day-to-day care. I told myself we were a team. I should have paid closer attention to the moments when the team dynamic felt slightly off. There was the phone call in December, 3 months before I found out about the document. Danielle called me on a Wednesday evening while I was helping Lily with a science project, something involving baking soda and vinegar, and she mentioned very casually, very in passing, that Dad had been talking to someone at the bank about his accounts. She said, quote, "Just so you know, I think Daddy might be making some changes. You know how he gets." I remember looking at the baking soda container in my hand and thinking, that is a strange thing to say. You know how he gets. Like he was impulsive. Like he was the kind of man who made rash financial decisions. My father had the same checking account at the same bank for 37 years. He drove a 2009 Ford F-150 that he had paid off in 2014 and refused to replace because it, quote, still worked fine. He did not just get a certain way about money. But I let it pass. Lily's volcano was overflowing, Connor was crying about something in the other room, and my phone had 3 unread work emails. I let it pass. That is the thing about manipulation that happens inside a family. It does not arrive with a soundtrack. It does not announce itself. It fits itself into the gaps between the ordinary chaos of your life, until it is so woven in that you cannot find the seam. There was also the conversation at my father's house, in January, a week after I had met with Sandra the attorney, a week after I had filed the preliminary documents. Danielle dropped by while I was there. She had brought my father a rotisserie chicken and a container of coleslaw from the grocery store, and the 3 of us sat in the kitchen while he ate. At some point, Dad mentioned that he was glad things were getting sorted out with the house. He looked at both of us when he said it. And Danielle smiled and said, "Yes, Daddy, everything is being taken care of. Not Rachel is handling it. Not we have a plan. Just, everything is being taken care of." I remember that sentence now like a splinter under the skin. Small. Specific. You have to know where to press to feel it. Be honest with me. Have you ever had a moment like that? A sentence that felt slightly wrong, but you talked yourself out of it because the person saying it was family? I really want to know. Drop it in the comments. Because I know I am not the only one who has done this. My father died on a Thursday morning in late March. He passed quietly, which is a thing people say that sounds peaceful, and is also simply true. He had been moved to hospice care at home 11 days before, and on that Thursday morning, the hospice nurse called me at 6:47 a.m. While I was in the kitchen making school lunches, I remember the smell of peanut butter. I remember the particular sound the refrigerator made, that low, mechanical hum that I had been meaning to have looked at for months. I remember putting down the butter knife on the counter very carefully, like if I put it down gently enough, the call would somehow not be real. My father was gone. And the grief was, it was its own country, one I would not fully arrive in for weeks. But life does not pause for grief. That is not a complaint. It is just the truth. Within 48 hours, I was making phone calls. Within a week, I was coordinating the death certificates, the notifications, the bank accounts. This was what I had prepared for. This was the role I had taken on, the organized one, the responsible one. It was during the process of confirming the transfer on death deed with Sandra's office that something snagged. Sandra called me on a Monday afternoon. Her voice was careful in the way that professional voices get careful when they have information that is going to be unwelcome. She said, "Rachel, I need you to look at something." There is already a recorded document on the property. It was filed at the end of January. I said, that would be the preliminary filing I submitted. The one we discussed. She said, no. This is a different document. It is a warranty deed. It transferred full ownership of the property, sole ownership, to Danielle Marie Whitfield. It was recorded on January 28th. I did not say anything for a moment. I was standing in the parking garage of my office building, and the concrete smell of it, motor oil and exhaust and something metallic, suddenly felt very sharp and close. I said, was my name on it? Sandra said, you are listed as a co-grantor. Your signature appears on the document. I said, Sandra. I did not sign any warranty deed. There was a pause on her end. And then she said something I will not forget. She said, I know, Rachel. That is why I am calling you. Here is what I did in the next 3 hours. I sat in my car in that parking garage, and I called up the Harris County Clerk's online property records portal. It took me 12 minutes to figure out how to navigate it properly. I am not a legal professional. I am a project coordinator who knows how to read a Gantt chart, not a deed of trust. But the document was there, instrument number and everything. Recorded January 28th of that year. A warranty deed transferring ownership of 44 Sycamore Ridge Drive from Robert Gerald Whitfield and Rachel Ann Whitfield to Danielle Marie Whitfield. I stared at the scanned image of that signature for a long time. It was close. I will give her that. She had clearly practiced it, or studied it, or done something to make it pass at first glance. But it was not right. The R in Rachel had a loop I do not make. The W in Whitfield sat differently than mine. And the date written beside it, which would have placed me in that notary's office on January 22nd, was a Tuesday. A Tuesday when I have documentation, time-stamped emails, a calendar entry, proving I was in a project kickoff meeting in Sugarland from 9 a.m. to past 3 in the afternoon. She had forged my signature on a legal property deed in front of a notary, which meant either she had also fooled the notary, or, and this is the part that made my hands go cold, the notary was in on it. I sat there in the half-dark of that parking garage, and I thought about my sister stirring soup in my kitchen. I thought about the rotisserie chicken and the way she had said everything is being taken care of. I thought about you know how he gets, in December, that warning shot I had mistaken for small talk. And something shifted inside me. It was not rage. Not yet. It was something quieter and more precise, the way a compass needle does not slam to north. It settles. I opened the notes app on my phone, and I started writing everything down. Every date, every conversation, every detail I could remember. The soup, the bank comment, the Tuesday in January, the timeline of the filing versus my own documented presence elsewhere. I was not a victim sitting in a parking garage. I was a person with a case. And before I left that garage, I made 2 phone calls. One to Sandra Park to ask her what our next steps were legally, and one to my brother Marcus in Phoenix, who picked up on the 3rd ring sounding half asleep and who went very quiet when I told him what I had found. Marcus said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure." He said, "What do we do?" I said, "We do this the right way. We do not call her yet. We do not warn her. We build the case first." And that is exactly what we did. I want to tell you something about gathering evidence against someone you love. It is not cinematic. It is not satisfying. Not in the way movies make you think it should be. There is no moment where you slam a folder on a table and say, "Gotcha." There is just you at 11 o'clock at night, at your kitchen table after the kids are asleep, with a laptop, a yellow legal pad of your own, and a cup of coffee that has gone cold because you forgot to drink it. That is where I lived for the next 3 weeks. The first thing Sandra told me, and she was very clear about this, was that we needed to establish a paper trail that was airtight before we made any contact with Danielle or her attorney, if she had one. Because the moment Danielle knew we were coming, she would start building her own version of events. And in a legal dispute over a forged deed, the story that gets constructed first has a way of hardening into something that looks like truth. So, we worked quietly. Step 1, my own documentation. I pulled every calendar entry, every work email, every time-stamped digital receipt from the period around January 22nd, the date Danielle had written beside my forged signature on the warranty deed. My project kickoff meeting in Sugarland was in my Outlook calendar, confirmed by 6 separate email threads with the client. My badge swipe record at my office building showed me entering at 7:49 that morning. My corporate credit card showed a lunch charge at a sandwich place on Highway 6 at 12:17 p.m. I was not in a notary office in Pasadena signing over my father's house. I was 42 miles away eating a turkey club and talking about drainage easements. Step 2. The notary. This is where it gets complicated in a way I was not prepared for. Sandra filed a complaint and records request with the Texas Secretary of State's office, which oversees notary commissions. The notary whose stamp and signature appeared on the warranty deed was a woman named Beverly Okafor, commissioned out of a shipping and print center on Spencer Highway in Pasadena, the same general neighborhood as my father's house, the same general neighborhood where Danielle had spent the last 18 months, 3 or 4 days a week, caring for my father. That proximity was not a coincidence. I know that now. Danielle had found Beverly, had built a relationship, a familiarity, on the kind that makes a professional lower their guard for 30 seconds and press a stamp without looking as carefully as they should. Or Beverly had been paid. We did not know which yet. The investigation into Beverly's conduct was a separate track, one that Sandra handed off to a colleague who specialized in real estate fraud. What I knew was this: someone had notarized a document that bore my forged signature, and that someone had done it in January, while my father was still alive, while I was simultaneously working with a legitimate attorney to file the proper paperwork, while the 3 of us were having family dinners and making soup and talking about his medication like nothing in the world was wrong. Step 3. The timeline reconstruction. This is the part that took the longest and hurt the most, because it required me to go back through 2 years of ordinary life and look at it with completely different eyes. I went back through text messages, through voicemails I had saved, through a family group chat that my cousin Teresa had set up when Dad first got sick, where we shared updates and coordinated visits. And when I started reading it all with the question, what was Danielle building? Instead of just scrolling past it the way you do with family noise, the pattern became visible. It started in the spring of the year before Dad died. Danielle had begun inserting herself as the primary point of contact for his medical team. Doctors' offices, the home health aid company, the hospice organization we eventually brought in, all of them had Danielle's number listed as the primary family contact. Not mine, not Marcus's, hers. Which in isolation made complete sense. She was local, she was present, she was doing the work. But combined with what I now knew about the deed, that positioning looked different. She was not just being a caring daughter. She was constructing a narrative, one where she was the central figure, the one who was there, the one who had earned something, the one whose name on a property deed would make a certain kind of emotional sense, even if the legal process behind it was fraudulent. She had planned this for a long time, and the worst part, the part I keep coming back to, is that she was not entirely wrong about the sacrifice. She had done the work. She had been there on the hard days. She had earned something real. But somewhere along the way, she had decided that earning it was not enough. Well, she had decided to take the rest of it too. I do not know exactly when a person crosses that line. I have thought about it a lot. I think there is a moment where the resentment gets bigger than the conscience, and the logic starts to feel like justice, even when it is not. I think Danielle sat with her resentment for a long time before she acted on it, and I think she told herself a story where what she did was not theft, it was compensation. That does not make it legal, it does not make it right, but it makes her human, which is the uncomfortable truth this whole story keeps landing on. Marcus flew in from Phoenix in the second week of April. He had not been back to Texas in 2 years, and when he walked into my kitchen he looked thinner than I remembered, more tired around the eyes. He had a carry-on bag and a box of medjool dates he said he had bought at the Phoenix airport because he did not know what else to bring, and I loved him for that, for the complete and honest awkwardness of it. We sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours that first night. I walked him through everything: the deed, the timeline, the notary, the text messages, the medical contact positioning, all of it. I had printed everything out and organized it in a 3-ring binder, color-coded tabs, dated sections, because that is how I process things when I am frightened. I organize. Marcus is not an organizer. Marcus is a reactor. He sat across from me and got progressively more still as I talked, which with Marcus is the opposite of what you might expect. The stillness means the feeling is very large and he has not yet decided what to do with it. By the time I was done, he had not touched his coffee. He looked at the binder, then at me. He said, "Has she called you?" I said, "She has called me 4 times in the last 2 weeks, checking in about the estate, asking about the paperwork timeline, acting completely normal." He said, "What did you tell her?" I said, "I told her we were working through it, that Sandra was handling the county filings, that these things take time." Marcus nodded slowly. Then he said, "She does not know you know." I said, "Not yet." That was the most important tactical advantage we had. Danielle had filed the fraudulent deed in January. My father had died in March. It was now April. Nearly 3 months had passed, and she was waiting, I can only imagine how, for the estate process to conclude in her favor. She was probably tracking the county records, probably watching for the probate filing, probably thinking that the longer this played out without a challenge, the more settled it would become. She did not know that Sandra had already filed a formal title dispute. She did not know that the Texas Secretary of State's office had opened an inquiry into Beverly Okafor's notary conduct. She did not know that Marcus and I were sitting in my kitchen in Katy, Texas, with a color-coded binder and an attorney who had 22 years of real estate litigation experience. She thought she had won. That was her most expensive mistake. If you know someone who is going through something like this, a family member who is trying to quietly take what is not theirs, while everyone else is too deep in grief to look closely, you might want to send this to them. Because the most important thing I can tell you is, it is not too late to look. It is almost never too late. I want to give you Danielle for a moment, because she deserves more than a villain role, even in a story where she is absolutely the one who did something wrong. Danielle is 3 years older than me. She is the one who taught me to ride a bike in the parking lot of the Grace Community Church on Shaver Street when I was 7. She is the one who drove 40 minutes to sit with me in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning when Lily was born 6 weeks early, and I was terrified in a way I could not even articulate. She made me laugh during that wait. She brought terrible vending machine coffee and told me a completely ridiculous story about a coworker to keep my mind moving, and I remember thinking, this is what a sister is. She was also divorced, for the 2nd time. In the year before Dad got sick, she had gone through the end of a 7-year marriage that had taken most of her savings, and left her renting a 2-bedroom apartment in La Porte on a medical billing coordinator's salary. She was 44 years old. She was tired in the way that people get tired when they have worked hard, and the math still does not come out right. And then our father got sick, and she was the one who showed up. I think, and I have turned this over many times, I think the caregiving changed something in her. Not broke it, changed it. There is a particular intimacy to caring for a dying parent that the people not in the room cannot fully understand. You are there for the indignities, and the vulnerability, and the quiet moments at 2 a.m. when they are frightened. You hold something the absent siblings do not hold. And I think, for Danielle, that holding started to feel like ownership. Not consciously, not at first. I genuinely believe it started as a feeling, a slow-building sense that the house should go to her because she had been there. That an equal split was not really equal because the sacrifice had not been equal. And then the feeling became a plan. And the plan became a document. And the document became a crime. That is the thing about people who do what Danielle did. They rarely start as people who would do it. They arrive there through a series of small justifications, each one building on the last, until the action feels, to them, less like theft and more like correction, less like fraud and more like fairness. I am not forgiving her. I want to be clear about that. What she did was illegal, calculated, and it would have worked if I had not been thorough enough with my own filings to create a legal conflict that forced the issue into the light. But I understand her, and understanding her is what made the next part harder than I expected. Sandra filed the formal challenge to the warranty deed on April 18th. And the legal term for what we submitted is a quiet title action, a lawsuit asking the court to determine the rightful owner of the property and void the fraudulent transfer. It was accompanied by a sworn affidavit from me stating that the signature on the January 28th deed was not mine, supported by the time-stamped evidence of my documented whereabouts on January 22nd. A handwriting analysis report from a certified forensic document examiner Sandra had engaged, and a formal statement from the Texas Secretary of State's office confirming that Beverly Okafor's notary commission had been suspended pending investigation. Sandra also filed a separate criminal referral to the Harris County District Attorney's Office for forgery and real estate fraud. Danielle was served at her apartment in La Porte on a Thursday afternoon. And I know the exact time because Marcus was parked 2 blocks away, on the phone with me, waiting. He had insisted on being there, not at the door, not interfering, just present. He said he needed to know it had happened. I understood that. He called me at 3:41 p.m. and said, "The process server just left the building." I was sitting at my desk at work in a glass-walled office where 3 of my colleagues could see me through the partition. I kept my face completely still. I said, "Okay." He said, "How do you feel?" I said, "I do not know yet." That was the honest answer. Danielle called me 47 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Then a text. "Rachel, please call me. I can explain." Then another. "This is not what you think it is." And then, "Daddy told me to." He said it was what he wanted. That last one sat on my phone screen for a long time. "Daddy told me to." He said it was what he wanted. I thought about the yellow legal pad, the block letters, equal thirds, underlined twice. The man who had kept the same checking account for 37 years. The man who had said, "I do not want this house to become a weapon after I am gone." And I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. Because Sandra had told me from the beginning, do not engage. Not by text, not by phone, not by anything that Danielle or an attorney could use to construct a counter-narrative. Let the legal process be the conversation. Let the documents do the talking. So I did. If you have made it this far, if this story is sitting with you the way it sat with me, then you already know this kind of thing is not rare. It happens in families every day, usually quietly, usually to people who trusted the wrong person at the worst possible moment. Stories like this matter. If you want to hear more of them, you know what to do. Danielle hired an attorney, a man named Gary Pellegrini, who operated out of a strip mall office in Deer Park, and whose online reviews were, let's say, mixed. Gary's initial response to our quiet title action was that the warranty deed was valid, that Robert Whitfield had fully intended the transfer, and that Rachel Whitfield had in fact been present and had willingly signed the document. He submitted this claim with no supporting evidence, no counter-affidavit from the notary, Beverly Okafor, whose commission was suspended and who had retained her own attorney and was pointedly not speaking to anyone. No documentation of my father's intent, no witnesses to the signing, no explanation for why a man who had been on supplemental oxygen for 3 months and who struggled to finish sentences had somehow decided, without telling anyone, to abandon the equal thirds plan he had put in writing and hand the entire property to one daughter. Nothing. Because there was nothing to offer. The story Danielle told required my father to be a secret decision-maker and me to be a willing participant. And both of those things were demonstrably, documentably false. The forensic document examiner's report was particularly thorough, 12 pages. It compared the signature on the warranty deed against 17 authenticated samples of my actual signature, from tax documents, employment forms, the original filing Sandra and I had made, the notarized deed of trust from when I bought my own house in 2019. The examiner identified 9 specific characteristics where the forged signature diverged from my genuine signature. The loop in the R, the angle of the W, the way I connect the letters in Whitfield, which I have done the same way since the 8th grade. 9 specific, measurable, documented characteristics. Gary Pellegrini withdrew from the case 6 weeks after filing his initial response. Danielle could not afford to retain a replacement. She filed a pro se response. Herself, without an attorney. In it, she wrote, and I am paraphrasing, because I will not repeat her exact words, that she had done what she did because she felt she had no choice, because she was afraid that when the estate was settled, the house would be sold and the money split, and she would walk away with nothing that reflected the years she had given. She wrote that she loved her father. She wrote that she believed in her heart that he would have wanted her to have it. She did not use the word forgery. She never acknowledged the signature was not mine, but she also never claimed in that document that I had signed it willingly. There was no longer any version of her story where she was innocent. There was only a version where she believed she was justified. The court did not find that sufficient. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in late June. Harris County District Court, Family and Probate Division. Courtroom 333. I wore a gray blazer and flat shoes. Sandra had told me to dress professionally, but not to look like I was trying to perform competence, just to be the person I actually was. I had brought the binder, though I did not need it. Sandra had copies of everything. I just needed to hold something. Danielle was already in the courtroom when I arrived. She was sitting at the respondent's table, alone. No attorney beside her, a thin folder in front of her, wearing a dark blue blouse I recognized from a family birthday dinner 3 years before. She looked at me when I walked in, and then looked away immediately, the way you look away from something that is too bright. Marcus sat in the gallery behind me. He had flown back in from Phoenix the night before. He had not eaten breakfast, he told me later, because his stomach would not allow it. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Cynthia Reyes-Morales. She was in her late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular economy of movement that comes from having presided over 1,000 of these moments. She was not unkind. She was not theatrical. She read the submissions, she asked several precise questions, and she ran an extraordinarily efficient proceeding for something that was, on our side of the table, the most consequential 2 hours of the year. Sandra presented the forensic report, the time-stamped documentation, the Secretary of State's findings on the notary, the handwriting analysis, the clear legal impossibility of my having signed a document in Pasadena on January 22nd, while simultaneously generating a 6-hour digital footprint 2 miles away. Danielle, representing herself, said very little. When Judge Reyes-Morales asked her directly whether she could produce any evidence that Rachel Whitfield had been present and had willingly signed the warranty deed, there was a long pause. Danielle said, "I believed it was what my father wanted." The judge looked at her for a moment and said, "Not unkindly, that is not responsive to my question." Another pause. Danielle said, "No, I cannot produce that evidence." Judge Reyes-Morales voided the January 28th warranty deed. She found it invalid and legally void on its face, executed by fraud and forgery. She ordered the property title to revert to the estate of Robert Gerald Whitfield for proper probate distribution in accordance with the valid will and transfer documents on file, the ones Sandra and I had prepared, the ones my father had actually signed, with Gloria and her candy bowl as witness, equal thirds, the way he had always intended. The judge also noted for the record that the criminal referral to the Dawes office was an active matter, and that she made no findings on that track, which was properly outside her jurisdiction. The whole thing was over in just under 2 hours. Marcus was waiting outside the courtroom doors. When I came out, he looked at my face, and he said, "Okay," I said, "equal thirds." He sat down on a bench in the corridor and put his face in his hands for a moment, not crying, exactly, more like exhaling something he had been holding since the day I called him in Phoenix, and said the words, "I need to tell you something about Danielle." I sat down next to him. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and recycled air. Someone was talking loudly on a phone 20 feet away. Everything was completely ordinary. We sat there for a while without saying anything. That felt right. The Harris County District Attorney's Office accepted the criminal referral. I want to be honest about how I felt when Sandra told me that, because the honest answer is not a clean one. I felt relief, and then, almost immediately after the relief, I felt something heavier, something I do not have a clean word for. Not guilt exactly. Not regret. More like the awareness that a thing I had set in motion was now going to move on its own, further than I could see, and that I would not be the one deciding where it landed. Danielle was charged with forgery of a financial instrument, a second-degree felony under Texas Penal Code Section 32.21, and with real estate fraud. Beverly Okafor, the notary, was charged as well, with a lesser count of making a false acknowledgement. The investigation had determined that Danielle had paid Beverly $400 in cash to notarize the document without verifying that both grantors were actually present. $400. That is what my signature was worth to her in the transaction. $400 passed across a counter at a shipping store on Spencer Highway. I do not know what I expected that number to be. I do not think I expected it to have a number at all. Danielle ultimately accepted a plea agreement. I was not consulted on the terms. That is not how the criminal process works, and Sandra had prepared me for that. The Dawes office negotiates with the defendant and her counsel, not with the victim, and the resolution reflects the state's interests as much as mine. She received deferred adjudication. 10 years of community supervision. Significant fines. Mandatory restitution to cover a portion of the legal costs Marcus and I had incurred, and a requirement to complete a financial ethics course, which I admit struck me as almost absurdly inadequate when I first heard it, and which I have since decided to simply not think about. She did not go to prison. She will not have a final felony conviction on her record if she completes her supervision successfully. I have been asked many times whether I think that was enough, whether I think justice was served, and I have decided that the honest answer is, I do not know what justice looks like when the person who wronged you is also someone you grew up with. I do not know how to weigh a forged signature against a sister who drove 40 minutes to sit with you in a hospital at 2 a.m. I do not know how to put those two things on a scale and call a number. What I know is that the house is now being handled correctly. What I know is that my father's wishes are being honored. What I know is that Marcus got his third, and I got mine, and Danielle, after the legal costs and the fines and the restitution, will receive a reduced share that still reflects the intention of a man who believed in equal and fair. I do not feel victorious about any of it. I feel correct. There is a difference. The house on Sycamore Ridge Drive sold in October. The brown carpet was still there. Someone had finally replaced the garage door opener at some point. I noticed that when I went to do the walkthrough. The backyard had flooded twice during the summer, the real estate agent told us, which reduced the appraised value slightly, which my father would have found entirely unsurprising and probably would have had a dry comment about. I walked through every room by myself before the closing, just me. Marcus was back in Phoenix. The kids were at school. I had 40 minutes before I needed to be somewhere, and I used all of them. The kitchen still smelled faintly like him, like coffee and that particular brand of hand soap he had bought at the same hardware store for 20 years. The living room had a rectangle of lighter carpet where his recliner had been, a perfect ghost of the chair in the fibers. His workbench in the garage still had his tools arranged in the careful order he maintained, labeled in his block letters, neat and deliberate and certain. I stood at that workbench for a long time. I thought about what he would say if he knew what had happened. My father was not a man who expressed emotion with a great deal of volume. He processed things slowly, externally quietly, and then he made a decision and he moved. I think he would have been heartbroken about Danielle. I think he would also have been privately proud that the paperwork had held, that the thing he had put in writing, with his careful hands, had done what it was supposed to do. I think he would have said, I told you to handle it. And you did. Danielle and I have not spoken since the day of the hearing. I am not certain we will. I do not say that with anger anymore. Mostly, I say it with a kind of tired recognition that some things, once broken in a particular way, do not reassemble into the same shape. They might become something else, eventually. They have not yet. Marcus calls me more now than he used to. We talk about ordinary things, his job, my kids, the Astros, a podcast he thinks I should listen to. We do not always talk about what happened. But the fact of having gone through it together is present in every conversation, the way the lighter rectangle was present in the carpet. You know what used to be there, even when the thing itself is gone. My kids do not know the details. Lily is 11 now. Connor is 8. They know that their Aunt Danielle is not around right now, and they accepted that with the matter-of-fact resilience that children are better at than adults. Someday I will tell Lily the full story. I think she deserves to know it. I think she deserves to know that the organized one is not always the powerful one, but that documentation matters, and that when someone tries to rewrite the record, sometimes the record fights back. People ask me, when I tell this story, people always ask, what is the thing I would go back and do differently? And I understand why they ask that. We want the lesson. We want the clean takeaway that makes the suffering useful. I get it. I have asked that question about other people's stories too. But here is the honest answer. I do not think I could have seen Danielle coming. Not because I was naive, not because I was not paying attention, but because the person I was watching was not a stranger. She was someone I had known for 41 years. Someone who had been kind to me in real and specific ways, enough times, that the kindness had weight. And the weight made the warning signs look like family noise. The thing I actually learned, the thing that I think about now when I look at situations in my life, professional and personal, is this. Documentation is not paranoia. Filing the paperwork is not an act of distrust. It is an act of care. For yourself. for the people you love, for the versions of events that might get contested later by someone who decides that their feelings are a sufficient substitute for the facts. My father put his wishes on a yellow legal pad in careful block letters. I had those wishes turned into proper legal documents by a real estate attorney. I paid a notary named Gloria, and I kept every time-stamped record of every step of that process. And when someone tried to overwrite all of it, when someone pressed a forged pen to paper and tried to rewrite the ending of my father's life, the record held. The record held because we built it properly, because we took it seriously, because we did not assume that love was enough of a guarantee. Love is not always enough of a guarantee. I wish that were not true, but the people who have been in a room like Courtroom 333 know that it is. So write it down. File the paperwork. Get it notarized by someone with candy on their desk if you want. But get it notarized. Keep the receipts. Keep the emails. Keep the calendar entries. Not because you think someone will betray you, but because if they do, if the unthinkable ordinary thing happens inside your family, you want the record to be the one that tells the truth. I really want to hear from you on this one. Would you have handled it the same way? Would you have called Danielle first, given her a chance to come clean before filing anything? I genuinely go back and forth on that even now. Tell me what you would have done. I read every single comment. There is one more thing. A few weeks after the closing on the house, I was going through a box of my father's things that had been in my garage since the estate was settled. Papers, mostly. Old utility bills he had kept for reasons known only to him. A pocket calendar from 2009. Some photographs. And at the bottom of the box, in a plain white envelope with no label, I found a letter. It was handwritten. My father's block letters. Dated the previous November, 4 months before he died. It was addressed to both of us. To Rachel and Danielle. I will not read it to you in full. Some of it is his and ours, and some things belong to the people inside the story, rather than to the story itself. But I will tell you what it said in its essential truth. He wrote that he knew the two of us were different. That we had always been different. In temperament, in how we showed love, in what we needed and what we were willing to ask for. He wrote that he was proud of both of us in ways that were specific to who each of us actually was, not in the general way that parents sometimes love children, but in the way of a man who had watched two people grow up in the same house and become completely themselves. He wrote that he hoped the house would not become a weight. That was the word he used. A weight. He had seen it happen in other families, the object that outlasts the person and becomes the proxy for every unresolved feeling. He said he did not want that for us. He said he wanted it to be a clean ending, so the rest of our lives could be something other than a continuation of a fight that started when he was gone. He could not have known, when he wrote that letter, what was already in motion. He could not have known that Danielle had already begun building the architecture of what she planned to do. The letter was written in November. The deed was filed in January. Whatever he hoped for had already been decided against by the time he folded that paper and put it in the envelope. I think about that sometimes. Whether she read a letter like this and still went forward, whether the plan was already too far along, whether there is a version of events where she read his words and hesitated, even for an hour, and then kept going anyway. I do not know. I will not know. What I know is that I read that letter, sitting on the floor of my garage, leaning against a shelving unit, with a box of my father's old papers around me, and the smell of motor oil and dry concrete in the air. I read it twice. And then I sat there for a while without moving, in the way that you sit when you are holding something that deserves to be held before you put it down. My father wanted a clean ending. He did not get one. None of us did. We got the truth instead, which is its own kind of ending. Not clean, not neat, not the kind that fits on a yellow legal pad in careful block letters, but real, and documented, and ours. The house sold. The money was distributed. The brown carpet went with it, and the rectangle of lighter fibers where the recliner had been, and the workbench with the labeled tools and the garage door that finally opened on its own. I kept the letter. And I kept the binder. Both of them, because some things you hold onto as grief, and some things you hold onto as proof, and sometimes the same thing is both at the same time. If this story stayed with you, If you found yourself somewhere in it, even in a small way, then you already know why I share these. Because these things happen in ordinary families, in ordinary houses, in ordinary counties with floor cleaner smelling courtrooms and candy bowl notaries and sisters who once taught you to ride a bike. They are not rare. They are just rarely talked about clearly. If you want to be here when the next one comes, you know where the button is. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story today, send it to them. Sometimes the most useful thing is just knowing you are not the only one.